All right, thank you everyone. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Jen Wee. I started this company called T-RECs.ai. It's essentially a platform that enables people to trade renewable energy easily. I started off in the energy business since 10 years ago, in particular the renewable energy sector. And I decided that we need to inject some new technologies into the energy business, considering the fact that the entire world is transitioning into a new realm in the energy business. So for the past 7 years, if you would have noticed that all the new power plants that's built in the world for the past 7 years, more than 50% of them are renewable power plants. So today, in the entire world, majority of the power plants are still dominated by thermal power plants, and in particular coal power plants, and these are very, very old and dirty power. And there's a trend that this source of power is going to change to renewable, and there are many existing problems that exist within the energy sector. Old transmission network, insufficient transmission network. The world population by 2050 is going to go to 10 billion from 7.5 billion today. And energy is going to grow significantly. And by 2050, 25% of the energy requirement will come from electricity. Today it's about 15%. So there's a strong trend that requires the entire electricity production business to go through a big change. And as we speak, we are seeing a lot of changes. And today we have here very good representation of people from the industry. As what was mentioned by Quentin earlier, we want to hear from the industry experts today what is going on with the energy business and how is it related to blockchain. So we have a good mix of people from the certification sector, from the utility companies, from research institute, and from startups. So good representation, and what I'm going to do next is I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves, starting from the gentleman on my left, and then maybe share a little bit, a short 30 seconds about what you feel about the energy business and how is it going to change. Starting from Mathias.
Thank you. So my name is Mathias. I'm the director of DNVGL here in Singapore and the regional manager for our digital hub, which is basically a group helping the transformation of our maritime oil and gas and energy businesses. On the transition of energy, that is one core topic DNVGL is looking into, which is a classification, certification, but also technical advisory firm. As you rightly said, by 2050, 25% plus will be electricity. 70% of that will be produced by renewables. And even looking further, the electricity grid and the electricity or energy industry will have to go through an absolute reformation how it is organized. And I think later in the panel we hopefully have an idea how blockchain can help this reorganization, because billing for a kilowatt hour in future will be relatively boring. There's much more exciting things we can incentivize people to do in the electricity grid to optimize the grid on entire system level, and there blockchain would have a role.
All right, good afternoon everybody. My name is Vincent Bakker from Positive Energy. I worked 10 years for Shell, oil company, very far from renewables, and always in the investment sphere. And I think there's two things that I want to point out that I'm working on. One is what Quentin indeed said. Energy world is old-fashioned manual stuff. That works very well for big power plants. It doesn't work for the enormous amount of smaller projects that we need in the renewable energy world. So what our company does is we help developers of smaller solar farms, wind farms, hydro farms to find investors. And that's where digital technology is absolutely required over the traditional banker that flies business class with external advisors paid by the hour.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Fendy from Sembcorp. I'm currently doing a business development role in Sembcorp Solar. I've been in the industry for more than 10 years. And currently, we are actually one of the leading developers of solar system in Singapore. We have more than 130 megawatt peak of rooftop installations, secured contracts. And we are keen to always work with more companies who are keen to go green. We can provide you with the solutions. And basically, you just have to pay for whatever energy that you consume. So all the initial investment as well as the running costs will be borne by the developer. Just a little bit about what the topic at hand. I think as Quentin shared in the opening statement that energy industry is really going through major global transition. Some of the key things that he mentioned include decentralization, decarbonization, and digitization, right? These are all the keywords, and it's really a pleasure to be here to understand more from the panelists as well, how blockchain could be one of the solutions rather than a disruption or seeing it as a disruption, but how blockchain could be used to solve some of the key issues that we face in the energy industry when we are facing with all these transitions that are happening. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Marcus from Nanyang Technological University, specifically from Energy Research Institute, or in short, ARIAN. I'm a scientist and also a program director for renewable integration and microgrids. So one of my, the institute goal is to align with the Singapore government's objective is to reduce our CO2 emission intensity by 36% by 2030. All right. In addition to that, we work very closely with the agency and all the industry here. I'm very happy to be among this panel where I can see all the industry players are here. They are currently working with NTU, and most of them, like Sembcorp, we just signed an MOU last week in Energy Innovation 2018 in the presence of EMA and several other partners. And of course, as well as ENGIE, who has a project in Sembcorp, which I'll talk a little bit about. So I'm excited to be here to share a little bit about blockchain as well, a project that NTU has embarked with some industry partners. I think that this is something very exciting that we should be able to see this technology being deployed in not just the end use, but from generation, transmission, and distribution, and finally the end use. So I think that the potential is tremendous. So I'm excited to talk about it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Quentin Vaquette. So I've been with ENGIE for 10 years. I've spent 7 of that here in Asia. My background is mostly in M&A, deal making, in developing renewable energy projects. And so for the past 4 years, I've essentially not had a fixed role, because for the past 4 years, I've been building zero carbon businesses for ENGIE. And the reason is that today we are at an immensely exciting and alarming time. So I think not many people are aware of this actually, and we have about 12 years left, or actually 11 years left, to reduce our carbon emissions by 50%. If we don't, we're gonna have a really big problem on this planet. And the thing is that you and me will not feel it, right? Because today we're already a degree warmer than we actually used to be. And you know, we see the consequences, but they sort of seem distant, right? But the reality is that this is sort of a cataclysmic phenomenon. And so what happens is that at a certain point, we will reach a temperature increase that we won't be able to stop. And so that's the alarming part of it, because 11 years is really, really, really short to do anything about this. So voilà, so that's really important. Now, the very exciting part is that we've sort of crossed an inflection point in renewables. Today, renewables are cheaper than any other form of energy. Depends a bit on the location, but today, driving an electric car is cheaper than driving a petrol car. And so we've come to a stage where making those decisions, not to go green, but to go renewable, is an economic decision, is something that we can drive forward economically, not just because we believe in it. But it's something we have to do. We don't have a choice. We have to make this happen. And so I think the discussion we're going to have here today is interesting. And if anything, I would make a call for all of you in the room who are excited by this stuff, because there is so much to do in this space. There are so many economic opportunities. And they're just there waiting to be tackled, right? So if you're interested, I think come and talk to anybody here in the panel. I'm sure we know what to do with great minds.
Okay, thank you guys. If you hear through all the introduction, you will realize that most of us are talking about renewable energy, right? Not because I only invite people in the renewable energy sector, but these people are in the energy sector. You know, if you speak to anyone in the energy sector, most of the response and most of the topics you will be hearing are renewable energy. And what is making this so interesting? You know, in the traditional energy sector, everything is centralized. But when it comes to renewable, and when it comes to building infrastructure network to support renewable energy, then decentralized concepts becomes very, very important, from generation to transmission to usage, like what Marcus has mentioned earlier, which he will allude to later in his presentation, you know, about blockchain implementation. So decentralized becomes a very important concept in energy. So energy today, to many of the players, are still a very old-fashioned traditional business. And there is indeed a lot of opportunities for new concepts and new ideas to bring decentralization solutions into this sector. So in today's segment, in today's panel, we want to explore and we want to hear from the industry experts what are their views on blockchain in particular. Right? So blockchain in itself is a decentralized consensus concept. And renewable, wind, the new generation energy source and energy implementation globally is decentralized by design. So the question I would like to pose to the panel, the first question I'm going to pose is, in your opinion and in your experience, what is blockchain, you know, in your segment, you know, in your expertise? How is blockchain helping you? Or what do you think some of the problems that you're facing in your type of business, blockchain can come into use from a practical sense? Yeah, anyone can answer that question.
Maybe I start. I think traditionally energy business has always been a very, you know, in a way traditional and large-scale power plants and, you know, centralized power plant, but no longer is the case, right? Now we see more and more the proliferation of rooftop solar, where everyone, the consumers themselves are starting to produce energy. So they become what is commonly known as prosumer. That means they are producer as well as consumer at the same time. So when they produce energy, of course they can use it for their own consumption, but it doesn't stop there, because the energy that's produced, if there is an excess, it can actually go to the grid, and it can go to certain other consumers who want to consume green energy. So this is definitely one area of application where we can do this transaction, or I mean, it's called, I think Quentin mentioned, is a peer-to-peer trading. So peer consumers, you can sell the green energy to other people who want it, right? That's just one area. Another area which I think all of us have heard about, and Jen Wee, I think you can speak more about it, is basically the guarantee of origin, right? To certify that a certain kilowatt hour that was consumed by a certain consumer is really coming from a green source. This is definitely another area of application of blockchain. Yeah, I'll leave it to the rest to add on.
Maybe I'd like to add on to these two important points. I think coming back to this idea that the energy industry and how we are organized has to change dramatically if we go forward with the growth of renewables, but also how we better use our assets. We have already transmission, distribution assets, and so on and so forth. Blockchain has the great potential of reducing cost to a great extent by cutting out the middlemen and intermediaries, and it enables new business cases. I think these are two big chances for the industry. The margins have come down quite a lot with the kilowatt hour becoming really cheap. Maybe electricity will be for free and we pay a flat rate for our fridge or peak power consumption, our flat, like we do for the internet. So there is not much money to be made, but where there is money to be made is if you provide other services to the grid, and that could be a deferral of consumption, so maybe you do not consume energy to the benefit of somebody else, and you get something for this. You may charge your electric vehicle as a red traffic light through an induction charge. This is all small amounts, which if there would be an intermediary in the middle who has to organize this, wouldn't work economically viable. So blockchain, which could then handle these cases in recording this and rewarding this, would unlock these business cases. And I think there is a real potential going forward, so that basically blockchain is a technology which helps us to reorganize the grid different from the way that we do it today.
So I'll explore a bit of a different angle. Whereas we now have been talking about the selling of electricity. Once the asset is there, how can we run it? Where we're more interested in with our company is getting the projects off the ground to begin with. Traditionally, big company builds a big power plant, no problem, big government contracts, a few parties involved. We're now going to a situation where every rooftop becomes an energy producer, where every piece of land somewhere in the Philippines can become a solar farm. That's where you need more data solutions to manage the projects once they're there, but also to manage them to get off the ground. Because within all these smaller developers, the amount of people that come to us with projects that claim that have land rights, and we check it, it's a complete fraud. We come with people that they claim that they have a contract to sell electricity to the grid. I'm going to build it here. But it's physically impossible. The authenticity of data, checking, verifying, that's where there's a clear blockchain application.
Okay, maybe now I ask one specific question to Quentin. So I know we have seen your presentation. There are a lot of ideas that you have brought out about how blockchain can be implemented. Can you share with us some of the real use cases? It can be it can be industrial implementation, it can be in a pilot phase. What are some of those real case implementation that you have seen or get involved in that you see the potential to be rolled out as a real huge industrial implementation, within the next, 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, it's actually one of the ones I mentioned. So it's the TO, so it's the energy origin, and the reason. So maybe to take a step back. So TO is about really making sure that when you use a unit of energy as a consumer, mostly as industrial consumers, you know exactly from which power plant, and so you actually see it on a map, you know exactly from which power plant at which moment in time that electricity came. And so the reason we see usefulness for that is that you have today more and more companies who are actually requiring to source renewable energy for their production, because that's the promise they give to their own customers. And so what this does is that it really enables them essentially to have a way to communicate effectively, hey, look, this is where my power came from, and to be able to sort of certify in a way that we haven't been able to do before, my tire, my fridge, my whatever I've produced is 100% renewable, right? Because you know that the electricity came from that specific moment. Because just one of the things to know is that today when we speak about companies being 100% renewables, like Google's and so on, who are really pushing that forward. In fact, what they're doing is they are making sure that the amount of renewable electricity, the amount of electricity that they have consumed in total, has been produced by renewable electricity assets. But they're still using grey electricity because there's not always renewables. There's not renewables when there's no sun or no wind or no runoff river. So we see this as a very short-term, immediate application. The reason is that because it's so simple, right? And so it has an immediate use case. Some of the other things that I mentioned, I think will be much further in the future. Because maybe just the last thing to add is that when we speak, a lot of the blockchain discussions around energy speak about transactions, right? How do we facilitate transaction between players? And the complexity there is that energy markets are very regulated, right? So it's actually really difficult for a blockchain startup to come into that space without actually working together with an existing utility and getting sort of access to its retail environment. So it's not an easy industry to get in, right? And so I think if you look for applications, look for things that stay as far as possible from that regulatory aspect.
Okay, great. So the next couple of questions I'm going to ask, I haven't shared with them before. That's the intent. It's meant to be a little bit difficult, and I think you guys can take it, yeah? Okay. So DNVGL first. Okay. Yes. Yesterday we heard a great presentation by BChain talking about their collaboration with DNVGL, right, on some of the products. I'd like to ask you to share a little bit more about your involvement and how DNVGL got into this project. But the more difficult question I want to ask is, blockchain is about decentralization, yeah? But the key of this implementation of BChain is having DNVGL as the centralized party to certify that it's okay before it goes into the decentralized platform. So of course, implementation needs to go in phase. If we really want a true blue decentralized implementation of products or certifications, it needs to be really decentralized. So how do we eventually walk away from the thinking of still looking for one centralized party like DNVGL? Not saying that DNVGL is not the right party, of course, you guys are great, but how do we eventually move towards that real ultimate goal?
Okay, so maybe briefly on what we do with BChain, which doesn't have to do so much with energy, but just that we know what we do there. So it's basically two projects, and it's trial projects. They are commercial, but they are small, and you could also argue to some extent you do not necessarily need the blockchain, but you need to start somewhere. So the one idea is we certify a lot of assets, among others. We certify or classify a lot of ships. And if you want to move your ship out of a harbor into a harbor, there are a lot of handshakes required between the crew on the ship and the authorities in that harbor, or in the authority guarding the waters and whatever. And that is quite an effort in handing PDFs or maybe even paper copies and everything over. So what we have done is we have over 100,000 now certificates moved into a blockchain and added a kind of automated authorization process to that, so that the other side can kind of give an automated clearance to a particular ship. We run a pilot with the US Coast Guard on that one. So this is basically to make sure that nobody can falsify the certificates, and on the other hand that we can handle them in a much more efficient way to give clearance. That's one project. The other one, which is a bit more interesting because it's about wine and people probably like that on a Friday afternoon, is that we trace, and then we have a good bridge to their second question actually, that we trace wine, expensive Italian wines, from the vineyard to the supermarket shelf. So if you buy that bottle, which is usually bottles $200 plus, you can just scan the QR code, and then you can kind of get the entire history of that wine bottle, which was recorded in a blockchain from the vineyard to the shelf. And we try now to also do this with salmon, with Norwegian salmon, because apparently there's a problem that every year more Norwegian salmon is sold than fished. So, because there is fraud, right? So there's other salmon as well. So, and that is interesting. And then we come to your second question, because that needs a kind of sensor in the fish. So we have an IoT device which helps us to track that fish from the origin to, again, the supermarket shelf. And the same is actually true for the wine bottle. So what we never will get away from, at least I don't see how in some aspects at the moment, is the so-called last mile problem. And that is somebody ensuring that that particular grape, which was growing, a very non-digital grape, which was growing on a vineyard somewhere, is getting into the process, and this is correctly recorded in the blockchain. Because once that information is in the blockchain, it's not necessarily truth. From the transition from the physical into the digital world, there needs to be, I think, for the foreseeable future, some process of safeguarding this. And I think there is still a role then for companies like ours. Now, having said this, in retail, I think there are solutions like Amazon having this like staff-free supermarkets where cameras and robots and everything can kind of monitor what's happening. So maybe that's coming for other assets as well in some point in time. But I think solving the last mile problem, and then also certifying and guaranteeing the safety of that particular blockchain solution, that is still areas where then the classification, certification companies play a role. But having said that, we are working on this ourselves to transform, because we see that a few decades down the line, our current business model is definitely not valid anymore. And so we are in the way of preparing now, what do we do next?
Okay, great. So I think this is a problem that, that exists not only in the energy sector, it exists across different segments. And I mean, I'm glad DNVGL is taking a proactive stance to move towards a point whereby, you know, is addressing a problem that exists within the certification body themselves. So I thought this is a great move. So my next difficult question goes to Vincent.
The answer is no.
So in your business, I think you have a great concept. You're linking up the small developers to the investors, and you're operating that on the blockchain. So my question will be, is it really necessary for the blockchain technology to be deployed in your platform? Would it be achieving the same results without blockchain?
Our first 3 versions will not have any blockchain component to it. For exactly that reason. What we do, matching investors and developers, can be done by a single database solution. There's absolutely no direct reason. We do think it can add value in the future when we add in additional services. For an investor to know who put the data on the platform at which point in time, that verification, the fact that, for instance, DNVGL actually verified a piece of data, there's a lot of fake reports. I can take an old report from DNVGL, put my new drawing on there and say, oh look, they verified it, but I'm cheating. With the blockchain application of DNVGL actually logging in and saying, I verified this piece of data, I can put more trust into the data. I can weed out scams, I can put more confidence in the data. So it's a step up, it's not a necessity.
Okay, great. So for people within and outside the blockchain business, you know, in particular people in the blockchain business is always questioning about whether blockchain is really needed in any particular application. So today, we're lucky to have Marcus from NTU. I would like to give him for the next 5 to 10 minutes to talk about a real case pilot implementation on a reasonable scale in NTU on blockchain and energy on blockchain. So maybe we can flash the slide. Yeah, maybe I'll invite Marcus to talk a little bit.
Oh, okay. I just think that maybe we change a little bit to show a bit of slide. As an academia, normally we go with slides, right? Like any professors, right? So I'll show a little bit, but not too much, not too wordy stuff. Of course, I think perhaps some of you could be our alumni, but this is a 40,000 man campus that is having less than 2 square kilometers of space. To have a test bed of that size in Singapore is going to be difficult. So we are fortunate enough to have the whole campus as a test bed. So I will take this opportunity to share a little bit about Energy Research Institute. It really has 3 pillars looking into energy system, grid system that I worked on a lot, which is on renewable integration, and eventually on end use of energy. And that's what actually the context I hear a lot about the business case for blockchain at the end use for an urban system. But from a research perspective, we see more of the whole chain of an energy domain that we think that there's an opportunity to do that, because I hear from my colleague here is also talking about data. And I see that data is through the transparency. And that brings to the nation itself to bring the power system resilience. I think that a lot of things is going to happen because it provides a lot more transparency to the supply and demand, and potentially it could bring the system resilience, which is something that I think some of the Genco here that would understand what is resilience is all about. Because today we are looking at about the system average interruption duration index, SID, which is about less than 30 seconds. Can we continue to maintain that and bring it even better, less than 30 seconds? That means the average interruption per user per year is less than 30 seconds. Can we improve on that? And there's a national goal. We need to maintain that and make it even better. So this is some of the Research Institute goal that we should be building research outcome, building blocks that allow that to happen. So this campus that I was talking about, that Jen Wee was talking about, is there some kind of demonstration? Yes, this less than 2 square kilometers is now a test bed that started in 2011, officially announced in 2014, and the whole campus is a test bed, from aircon to lighting, renewables, except blockchain, because at that time it was not available. All right, maybe it was still a concept, but we haven't implemented blockchain, which I'll share a little bit more about that. So we've done all kind of things on electric vehicles, renewables, and all kind of things in that. So then it comes to the government spending a lot of funds in this area, all right, over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, getting Sembcorp Island to be a test bed as well. So what I'm trying to say, these are all infrastructure built by the government, preparing for industries who wants to adopt that. So if take for instance, like ENGIE has an investment doing a project in Sembcorp Island that putting in hydrogen and testing a hydrogen van, for example. All right, Murata or Sony putting in their batteries, and Sembcorp potentially want to do another different project in different areas. So these are all test bed prepared by the government to facilitate that. And we are seeing that potentially there could be 8 microgrids available, and that allows trading. All right, and that could be potentially be a blockchain technology to be implemented here. But I think to answer Jen Wee's question directly, right, what are we doing? This is a campus of NTU. There's a 5 megawatt solar already being installed. Not very big, but in Singapore context for such a small land area, and you can see it's competing with all the services up in the rooftop. All right, we have fume hood all over the place, which is very energy intensive. In one building itself, we have 600 fume hood. It consumes lots of energy. All right, and we got to find ways to reduce the energy intensity in that school. But with that solar installed in it is a very difficult case, but we managed to install it. So now the next stage is we already called for tender. It's an evaluation stage to put storage, energy storage, to couple into the building grid itself. So at a point of coupling, I think we see that as an opportunity to allow blockchain transaction to happen. We're already streaming 13 buildings data continuously into cleantech. So with all those data, it allows us to aggregate those data, and we do analysis and create smart contract out of it. So there are already nodes being set up to allow us to do some form of smart contract and blockchain transaction in the campus at this moment. So we are quite excited about it, but the end goal is we like to test all this concept, the know-how. Hopefully, we will lower the risk for the industry who will come and do this adoption, because there will be IP, technology disclosure or know-how that will be created, and it will be useful for the industry because it will lower their risk to all this exposure, because it's an area that could still be risky. We hope the university could be useful through the research institute, helping the industry to reduce all these risks of the technology implementation that may not surface immediately. All right. So in a nutshell yes, it's an ongoing project, and we hope that the outcome in another year will be something that's significant for us to report and share with the industry partners. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. I really like this panel because for once, I think we really want, deep in our heart, we are asking this question, right? Always, is blockchain really suitable for implementation across industries? So today we're hearing, from the people in the business that there are really use cases that utilizes blockchain. Some use case is suitable for blockchain, some is not, but there are enough use cases, real practical use cases for blockchain implementation in the energy business. So, and Singapore being a small country, we are doing a lot of work, across the different industry, across the different segments of the industry on blockchain technology. So I have a list of questions from the floor. The first one goes to Fendy. So the question says that it's great to hear that the developer is willing to cover the upfront cost to install solar panels. But this question is in particular for Malaysia. In Malaysia, that exists only for really large systems, right? How about houses? So the question is, do you invest in solar panels in residential houses?
Okay, thanks for the question. We are actually actively looking at this area, whether we want to also do solar on residentials. At the moment, to do solar on residential is not an easy matter. I mean, if you look at Singapore context, right, most of us are living in HDB, right, government public housing, and we are already doing solar projects on public housing, right? It's actually a project that is rolled out by HDB, okay, and we actually participated through open tender, and we have Solar Nova 2, Phase 2 and Phase 3. So that is the bulk of the housing. But if you're asking me about implementation of solar on private residentials, right? So if you own landed properties or other type of properties that have some roof where we can install solar, yeah, we can talk, we can discuss what's the arrangement like. It also depends on the customer, right? What kind of model are you thinking about? Are you thinking of footing the capex? If not, if you were to foot the capex, then are you then agreeable to sign a long-term contract for energy supply with us, and so on and so forth. So there are some complications or some things that we need to discuss deeper, depending on the customer's preferences. Yeah.
Okay, so for whoever who wrote this question, the summary is he's happy to discuss with you. You know,
Yes.
we can take this offline, and if you have like 100-200 private houses for him, I think he'll be very interested to do. Okay, the next question goes to Vincent. Specifically to your business, how is the take-up rate? How many people are really interested in investing into solar?
A lot. We had a investor calling us a few weeks ago. They said we got a fund set up of a few $100 million, 200 million of which has to go to Asia. We have no clue where to start. Can you help us? That was just last week. The misperception is that renewables is bad business, it's philanthropy, you never really earn any money. We see projects with 10, 15, 20% return, with some debt, 30, 40%. That's a bit more than my bank account. So yeah, I would say the interest is really there.
Okay, great. I totally agree with that. There are, in the solar investment business, there are really more investment money than projects available, you know, in the region. All right, the next question goes to Mathias. DNVGL is, these guys know what he's talking about. Huh? He's trying to launch InstaTrust, PPA marketplace. Will blockchain technology be helpful for this?
Sure. I mean, I think wherever you can automate, so to say, or where you can take out any intermediary to create trust and be more efficient in getting these transactions resolved, there is a point for this. But the one thing I didn't manage to mention before, and I just used the chance now together with this question, is I think one big problem we do have with blockchain has nothing to do with technology, but it has to do with the partners around a certain solution, because it changes the way these people interact. It changes gravity in some points. Where are the powers located? And I think that would be a very interesting discussion going forward. When we think blockchain, we shouldn't think so much in just transferring existing models into a blockchain equivalent. We need to change the entire way how we handle these particular problems with the help of blockchain. And this is where the real problem lies, at least what we feel. And we suddenly have so many stakeholders around the table who have always done something like that, and now tomorrow blockchain makes it different. So I guess also in this particular aspect, that is the more interesting discussion to have. There is an application for this, but how do we actually then organize that?
Okay, good. So we're almost at the last few questions. So this question is quite similar to what I wanted to pose to the panel, but I'm going to reorganize this a little bit. So in energy on blockchain, you know, for the past 1 to 2 years, you know, I've seen, you know, in literature and in some of the reports that I read, there are a few segments or few potential use cases in energy sector for blockchain. They are peer-to-peer trading, crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, renewable energy certificates, and distribution of electricity. So there are these are just some of the potential use cases that people are building startups for, and some of the industry are also implementing such use cases. So this is open to the panel. Which of these in particular do you think is blockchain most suitable and has the highest chances of getting a real full-scale industrial implementation soon?
So I'm personally very interested by the automating capabilities of blockchain, because we talked a little bit about, is blockchain useful, is it not useful, and I'm not always clear on the answer to that question. I think there's a lot of things you can actually do with centralized databases. But I think the fact that you can automate transactions, the fact that you can have events happening automatically because of the structure of your database, if you want, because of blockchain, I think that's interesting. And so in a network in the energy sector whereby, fridges start to buy their own electricity, cars start to trade their own electricity and so on, that's really interesting. Now, this being said, it's also, and that's related to what I said earlier, it's not easy because you get into the regulated environment of the energy sector, which means that it's a difficult market to enter. So in that context, I think there's a lot of potential, but I think it's still a couple of years away before we'll see that at a large scale. It's being tested today, but before it gets to large scale, it's still a bit away.
Just to add on to that, because especially for our context in Singapore, the energy sector, I would say, is rather developed actually. A lot of things are actually automated, and is an open market. And the most recent one, of course, all of us are aware, is the open electricity market, where the government actually opens up the whole market to all, even to the households, right? To all levels of consumption, we can actually choose our own retailers. So the infrastructure is there. There are already processes, there are already systems that are robust, that have been operating for years, and it's successful, right? And I guess I'm not a blockchain expert, but the challenge is really to find where really is the value add of blockchain, because within the current setup, right, people are comfortable with the way processes are audited, right? Processes are checked, and so on. So when we completely decentralized, how do we gain the trust, right, for the blockchain operations to really take off? That the process will not be compromised, that it's secure, right, and all these things. And that will become the main selling point, I would say, of why people should switch from the current way they operate to using a blockchain technology. Thanks.
Okay, so that's all the questions I have, but I just want to do a quick summary. There are a lot of applications for the energy sector to be used, especially as we move towards a very old-fashioned, traditional, centralized way of doing business to decentralized, decarbonized, and digitized way of doing business. So the blockchain community, needs to consistently, find opportunities for the industrial players, and the industrial players, in my opinion, is also looking for constant opportunities for technologies to help them build their business. My opinion is, and I believe is what many of the panel speakers agree with me, is blockchain is a technology that is good, and it will be utilized, more efficiently and more effectively as we move along. But we really need hard work, and we really need commitment. Such kind of setups organized by LongHash is a good platform for industry players and blockchain players to come together to share the problems in the industry and to share the technologies available that the industry can use. So I think that's all I have for the panel today, and thank you very much for the speakers, and thank you for coming, and thank you for the great sharing, and shall we give them a round of applause?